Hello, good evening, and welcome to the TNT Show. I'm John Drummond. I'm your host for the next 60 exciting minutes. Guaranteed exciting minutes. But first of all, it's been another great day for British democracy. Well, the nation was convulsed with Boris Johnson's dissing of devolution. Number 10 has announced that BJ speaks for the majority in Scotland. As a result, number 10 has been flooded with hippie requests to know what they're smoking. And no doubt that will be revealed in due course. Thanks for joining us this evening. We have yet another great guest. You always get great guests on the show. It's a guarantee. And I'm really excited that he's able to be with us tonight. Tonight, the TNT Show welcomes Kenny Farquharson. Kenny is an award-winning journalist and columnist in the Times newspaper. Previously, he was with Scotland on Sunday as editor and also with the Scotsman. So he's got a long and honourable track record in Scottish journalism. And we're taking your questions live. TNT stands for The Nation Talks. So in many respects, this is your show. You're talking to the nation is talking to Kenny, and through me and through you. So send us your queries. You'll see the information on the screen. You can go to Independence Live on the website, or you can write to me, john@cleash.com. Anybody can do that, whatever you want to do. So, in many respects, this is your show. I'm sorry for the slight quivering in the background. That's my green screen misbehaving. Now to our guest. Tonight, the nation talks to Kenny Farquharson. Welcome, Kenny. How are you coping with the pandemic?
Oh, the pandemic. Well, thank you, John, for having me on, and hello everyone watching at home. Pleasure to be here. Pandemic, well, my party days are behind me, John. You know, my drinking and clubbing and carousing days are well in the past. So I'm not really missing much. I live such a quiet and blameless life these days. You know, I'm like a monk. So it's not really much of a difference to me, to be honest.
Really?
Honest.
That's good to know. That is very good to know. Tell us a little bit about your background, Kenny. You grew up in Dundee, is that right?
That's right. Yeah, I was born in 1962. I was brought up on the Hilltown area in Dundee, a less than salubrious area, perhaps. I think it's fair to say. My father was a tool maker, and he worked for Timex, and my mother was a shorthand typist.
Right.
And she worked in the jute mills, in the office in the jute mills. And
okay.
But I mean, it was not salubrious, as I said, John. I mean, it was like 2 rooms in a tenement with no toilet, no bath, no shower, shared toilet on the stair with 3 other families. That kind of tenement life, and very happy though, and very secure, very very stable upbringing, and you know, very contented kind of family background until I was in my mid-teens. I lost my father in a car crash when I was 14. He was aged 38. So that was obviously a very difficult time and quite a formative time as well, as you can imagine.
Yeah, I'm very sorry to hear that, Kenny. It reminds me a little bit of Brian Cox, because he lost his father when he was 8.
Yeah.
And his mother was so very deeply affected that she needed help and treatment. So he was sort of brought up by, the extended family, as it were.
Yes.
By the way, I was in Dundee recently, and I went to visit some of the old mills that have been converted into museums.
Yeah.
I mean, hugely impressive.
It is.
On the other hand, to learn that the average lifespan for somebody who lived in Dundee was a fraction of that of somebody who lived outside of Dundee, because of the extreme conditions in the mills. Quite an eye-opener.
Yeah. I mean, I left Dundee when I was 18 years old to go to university, and I've never actually lived and worked in the city since, but I kind of carry it with me, and it's something I feel myself as I consider myself as a kind of unofficial Dundonian ambassador, and it is very important to me. I go home for the football and things, and I do carry with me the memory of my time there. But my father was had kind of, I think these days it's called periods of insecure employment. He at one stage he was selling encyclopedias around doors, and he was driving an ice cream van and things like that. And so there's a kind of, even though you're too young to process it, and I never appreciated that we were in difficulties at all at the time. But there must be something psychologically and emotionally, perhaps, that kind of is instilled in you and becomes part of how you view the world.
Yeah.
And consciously or not. And, it's whether or not you through a process of, you begin to realize this, or it comes out in what you do with your life.
Yeah. So when did you decide to get into journalism? Was that early on after university, or was that sometime afterwards?
I'd always been able to write for some reason. There was only 5 books in our house. You see behind, I've got a number of huge bookshelves in my house these days. I've got a house full of books, got thousands of books. But when I was growing up, there was only 5 books in the house, and one of them was a Haynes manual for a Ford Escort. It was like, and the other one was the Bible. It was like, there was a practical man's book of things to make and do. There were none of it was great literature. But there's also lots of conversation around and talking in language and spoken language rather than written language. So I always had a great love of language, and that seemed to come out. So I knew I was good at it. And initially I wanted to be a police dog handler. That's what I always wanted to do when I was young. And it was only when I was taken aside and told, no, you're going to university, you're going to do something else, son. You're not going to be a police dog handler. I was very disappointed at that. And then I wanted to be a psychologist, because I've always been interested. I think that my early experience with my father, losing my father, I think gave me an interest in people and resilience and emotional intelligence. And I was kind of I think an experience like that at a young age, it's like it tunes your emotional antennae, and you become kind of aware of people and how they're feeling, how they react to you, and how they deal with each other. So that very much interests, and it still interests me, John. I mean, for me, that's what interests me in politics. Some people are interested in politics as a policy thing, or as an ideology thing, or a nationality thing. For me, politics is all about people. It's understanding people in power, how they act in certain situations, understanding them psychologically, understanding the voters, understanding them individually and as a mass, how they respond to things. And it's that constant fascination with people that interests me. But but I went to university. I went to studied English at Aberdeen University, and then I did a postgrad in journalism at Cardiff University. Then got my apprenticeship at the Coventry Evening Telegraph, writing about the car industry, actually, in the mid-'80s. So that's how I got into it.
That must have been fun.
It was enormous fun, and journalism is fun. It's kind of better than working for a living. It really is. It doesn't. It's hard work, but it never feels like a lot of work a lot of times, But it's taken me all around the world and got me into some scrapes and got me into some interesting places and met some interesting people you wouldn't normally. It's taken me to Afghanistan and New York and Washington and Beirut, and it's Northern Ireland, particularly during the Troubles. I was there a lot during the Troubles and did a lot of work there. And of course, as a political editor, which I was for about 20 years, really, it gives you a front row seat on Scotland's rebirth as a democratic nation. And that was being involved in the campaigning and the journalism that agitated. We were criticised as fans with typewriters, pushing for a Scottish Parliament, and that was one of the main criticisms of the Scottish press at that time. And guilty, absolutely guilty, and that's what we saw. We saw we were addressing a democratic deficit. Yeah. And the newspapers I was involved with at the time, Scotland and Sunday, they were campaigning newspapers, campaigning for home rule, campaigning for Scottish self-determination. And it's sometimes curious, John, you're kind of, when you get some of the criticism from the yes side these days, about being an evil unionist, and I occasionally, I usually bite my tongue, but occasionally I say, well, people, there's a whole generation of people who you condemn as unionists who devoted almost their entire adult lives and their careers to fighting for Scottish self-determination, to get a Scottish Parliament after, after hundreds of years. So sometimes it feels that it can feel a little bit raw sometimes when you're on the end and of some of these criticisms and being treated as if you paint the curbstones red, white, and blue. You know, so it's not entirely true.
I mean, you can understand, I suspect, why people might take that view, though, because in many respects, you know, if watching politics, I suppose, teaches you anything, it's the fact that it's a movable feast.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's a bit of a circus. It's there, but it moves on. And the successful, if I can call them participants, move with it. They move in lockstep with history. And that's about big change as opposed to small changes, you know. And that separates statesmen from politicians, I suppose, at the end of the day. And everyone moves at a different speed. Everyone's on a journey, you could argue, but not all at the same speed. So therefore, the likelihood is that some people will disagree because their rate of change desired change is greater than other people's, for example. And everybody needs to come to a view on that, what they feel comfortable with. And it varies across age and a whole raft of different, as your psychological training would probably determine too. So it's not to be too unexpected. And also, you don't, I suspect, want to be in an environment where everyone agrees, because I'm always reminded of the old adage that I think it was Ben Franklin who said way back 200 years ago, news is what somebody somewhere doesn't want to see in print. Anything else is advertising.
Absolutely, and you know, and that's part of the fun of it. You know, John, there's a kind of insurgent, rebellious, or just troublemaking. You know, there's the people in journalism. It certainly attracts people that aren't necessarily employable in the real world. You know, because they have a certain kind of a combination of character traits which aren't necessarily always regarded as positive in the corporate world, but make you a good journalist. You know, kind of resilience, kind of tenaciousness, and tenacity, I should say, tenaciousness.
That works. If you want to state, that would work.
Almost. I should have just carried on there. But you know, that's the skills needed, the kind of psychological foot in the door is a much underrated skill. Yeah,
I remember. I think it was Andrew Marr said in his memories that one of the jobs he was given, well, I think he started in the northeast of England, some newspaper there, was when there was some sort of death. His job was to go and get a photograph of the deceased, which meant a foot in the door and nicking something from the mantelpiece.
Yeah, do you know, I've done that myself, John, and it's there's a woman at Strathclyde University, I think, who is writing a book about that. It's called The Death Knock, and you know, I'm maybe I'm slightly unusual because I've both done that and been on the receiving end of it in my family on a couple of occasions, and there's a way of doing it. There's a way of doing it that is respectful and can actually be a great process of catharsis for the family, and for some people, and to be able to do it well, do it with sensitivity, to do it right, and to have, you know, I've had people say that, you know, it's the only time in their loved one's life that they got their name in the paper, and it had to be right, and you had to take care to do it right. And I remember my uncle died a few years ago. It's a couple of years ago, and he was a maintenance man at the NCR factory for many, many years, and he was also a great golfer, and he's captain of one of the municipal golf clubs in Caird Park Golf Club. So he got a few paragraphs in the Courier, and it wasn't much. It was like 8 paragraphs or something, down page in the Courier, but it was beautifully done. Every detail was right, and it was lovely. And I actually wrote to the Courier editor at the time and said, look, you won't get many of these letters, but, you know, please give my thanks to the reporter who did that small, insignificant story about a golf club captain that, you know, will be cut out and kept by that family for the rest of their lives, you know, and it's really important. So, you know, there's a way of doing these things and doing them well. The trick that I was taught, okay, this is telling journalism secrets, but was to go and find the local minister or priest and take them to the front door with you.
Right.
I got taught that in Belfast when I did some work in Belfast.
Right.
And that's what the journalists in the Belfast Telegraph taught me. Find the local priest or minister, and walk to the front door with them, because you'll always get in.
Yeah.
There's a journalist secret for you, John.
There you are, folks. All you aspiring journalists out there. Now, I suspect there'll be more than a few, because in as much as journalists get lots of criticism, and I'm sure you get your fair share, there's still a big appetite amongst a lot of young people who would like to, see their name in print, to be able to make a contribution to the development of the country generally, and they see that journalism as an avenue to doing that, But let's talk about that for a second, because you must experience this. There is a fairly sharp downturn in readership of newspapers nowadays. I'm of a certain age now where I enjoy reading a newspaper. The physicalness of the newspaper is important to me. Mm-hmm. But I suspect, I'm very much a dying breed here. And when I look at the stats, they're pretty stark, frankly.
Yeah. I think that, there's no denying that, if you look at it, stand right back from it, look at it on a wide angle lens, the printed newspapers have been in decline since the mid-1970s. Yeah. This is not just the internet that's doing this. It's not just smartphones. It was radio, it was television, it was all kinds of things. So the printed word has been in decline in the Western world anyway, since the mid-1970s. But the appetite for news doesn't change. All that changes is the means by which people want to actually access their news. So even the mainstream media organizations that get so much stick, and some of it quite justified, they're not really losing readers. They're losing readers for their printed products. Yeah. But that readership is just going online. Yeah. And the problem being faced by industries such as my own is that people still want news, but you have to persuade them to pay for news in a different way. They were willing to pay for it when they were getting, the Dundee Evening Telegraph buttons at the corner when they're coming out the factory gate. They're willing to pay for, papers that have magazines in them. Even these days, the sales of our Saturday paper are much greater than the sales of the daily paper. But it's getting to people to pay for their news constantly. And the industry, the media industry, has not been nimble enough and not been smart enough over the last couple of decades to find a way to make that happen on a sustainable basis. Now, the Times, as well as being one of the world's great newspapers, the oldest newspapers, founded in 1785, it's had lots of struggles over that time. My editor, John Witherow, has a great line that he sometimes uses. He says that the Times is now making a profit for the first time since the French Revolution. And we are making a profit because we have found a way, using a subscription model, to get people to pay for what they regard as trusted journalism. Now, I've no doubt some of your viewers tonight, John, will be splitting into their cup of tea, on the phrase "trusted journalism." But it's that's what we feel we are trying to offer. Yeah. And you may not agree with it, but it's sincerely offered and professionally done, I would argue. And we've got correspondents all around the world. We've got commentators from every political corner of the political spectrum. We try and do a good job. And in Scotland, we're doing. We've got a great politics team, a great sports team, a great kind of lifestyle team. We've got a supplement at the weekend called Alba that covers food and holidays and lifestyle and arts. Yeah. So we're trying our best, and we have about 25,000 people on a daily basis who pay for our journalism, whether it's buying a physical paper or money to a subscription model to read it online. So it's I'm by nature I'm not a ochone woe is me kind of guy. I'm more of a glass half full type of bloke, and so I when people are writing about this age in 100 years' time, they're going to be talking about us and this time and the media like they talk about Caxton. Yeah. This is like a Caxton type moment. Yeah. In the history of mass dissemination of information, and it's enormously. It's exciting. The amount of the ability to get information to people all around the world. A kid with a mobile phone in Kenya, the access that they have to the world's knowledge that just wasn't possible for them 10, 15 years ago. And it's so I think we naturally have a tendency to look for the negatives, but I think the positives are enormous. And something like Twitter, something like social media, it's enormously democratic. I was doing a talk to kids studying journalism at Glasgow College the other week, and I was saying to them, before these are working class kids just trying to get a foothold to get a diploma in journalism. They're not doing degrees necessarily in journalism. So they're starting out at perhaps a lower level, and I was saying, they have direct access to the most powerful people in the world, and on exactly the same basis as the people who went to posh schools, the people who come from big houses in Bears Den, the people who have all the advantages of everybody else. They just have the same Twitter account as a wee guy who's just from a scheme who's just starting studying journalism at Glasgow College. They have the same access to the powerful, and all that they need is application, attitude, resilience, persistence, charm, very underestimated kind of thing. Be charming, and whereas before, like when I was trying to get when I was starting as a journalist, trying to get to anybody of power, you had to go through receptionists and switchboards and use influence and use power and use any advantages you had, and it was much more difficult.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Well, I suspect I agree with you. I think we're on the cusp of even bigger change. But let's move on to some questions now, Kenny. We may. Callum MacLeod is asking, Kenny, do you think honest UK mainstream journalists show bias against the devolved parliaments?
I never really detected it until recently. What I detected before was a kind of curiosity, because we were an innovation when we were setting up the parliament, and a lot of the things that we had the advantage of not being burdened by hundreds of years of history, so we could. The Scottish Parliament. I remember I wrote the Code of Conduct for journalists for the Scottish Parliament way back, because I was the convener of the Scottish Parliamentary Journalists Association back in the late 90s, and so we were able to do things like counter journalists who were trying to be lobbyists, which there were a lot in Westminster. There was the editor of Widget, this political editor of Widget Monthly was actually a lobbyist for the widget industry. It was that kind of thing. So there was a lot of interest in how we did things, a lot of interest in the committee system and what have you. I think only now am I beginning to see a kind of a questioning of the purpose and legitimacy of the Scottish Parliament, and it's alongside that it's a kind of an emboldenment of the kind of people who, and there was a lot of them, voted no for a Scottish Parliament back in 1997. So it isn't just the down south; it's people in Scotland as well. Okay, so these were, and there was a lot. There was, I can't remember the exact number, but there was maybe about 30% or something of Scottish voters voted no in the two-question referendum against the Scottish Parliament. Now, in the 20 years since then, those people went quiet. Okay, they kind of saw that they'd lost the argument, and they went along. They were caught up in the enthusiasm, perhaps, or they caught up in the sweep of history. They realised they were perhaps on the wrong side of history, and they kind of kept stewing. And I've noticed, perhaps in the last year or two particularly, a much more vocal unionism about, which is anti-Holyrood, anti-Scottish Parliament, coming to the fore, being much more vocal, and not really finding any purchase within even the Conservative Party in Scotland, which, but perhaps is finding a voice now in some kind of outlets across the UK, and perhaps in the unguarded moments also in some of the comments by the Prime Minister.
Yeah, well, that's a very gentle way of putting it.
On Twitter the other day, when he made his unguarded comments, I said that Boris had pulled the pin out of the grenade and sat on it, and that's precisely what he's done.
Pretty much. It's a bit like Brooks this morning in the Times had him depicted with a caber. Yeah. He stopped short of putting it on one end of his anatomy, but left it resting on his head. We've got a question that came in some time ago. Kenny says, the question is, could you ask Kenny if after 80% of the 2020 Indy polls per Professor Curtis, with yes over 50% and 13 polls in a row also showing that, if he accepts that Indy is now the settled majority view in Scotland and that Indy Ref 2 timing must be for Holyrood to decide in the same way that only Westminster decided on EU referendum timing?
Very good question. That's two questions. I'll take them individually. First of all, polls. Of course, at the moment, a snapshot of Scottish people, independence is the majority view and rising. But I think we are in a very volatile situation, and there's tremendous kind of royal in voting and attentions here. And since 2014, but 1 in 5 yes voters have gone to no, and slightly more than 1 in 5 have gone from no to yes. So there's much more transfer of voters and people. I don't think it's not even just soft voters. These are people who are changing their minds. Some are hard transfers and some are soft transfers and what have you.
Yeah.
So there's and I think there isn't the Scottish politics is very fluid. It's not static, and in particular, there's an idea in the Yes movement, if you'll forgive me, John, is that once you're yes, you never go back. And that's just not the case. About 1 in 5 yes voters, as I was saying, has changed their mind. So there's transfers both ways and all to play for on both sides. But yes, definitely at this moment, and on a momentum as well. The Yes campaign. I don't know how long we'll call it the Yes campaign, but the pro-Indy campaign is on a roll. It's got what we in politics call the big mo. Big momentum behind it. And it's a very impressive momentum. And my own view is that if it gets to 60%, then you start to become a tipping point. Then it's at a stage where it's going to be very hard to kind of counter. And at that point, when at that 60%, all other kind of things happen. Once you start to assume that independence is coming and is on the horizon and is now likely rather than just a possibility, all other things start coming into the equation, and even people for whom independence isn't their first preference have to come to terms with the possibility of independence and have to engage in the debate about independence. And that's going to be a fascinating moment, because once you do that, then independence no longer becomes the property of the independence movement. And this is something which I don't think is fully appreciated by yesers, John. It's like the idea that the Indy movement won't get to decide what independence is like. The Indy movement can take Scotland to independence, but once there, and just short of that, when you're deciding the exactly how the new nation would be constituted and what its relationships would be, at that point, that's a decision for all of Scotland. That's as much a decision for people who didn't vote for independence as it is a decision for people who, and that's going to be quite. I don't think that the people in the Yes movement have perhaps made that mental shift. There's a kind of sense of ownership of it, which won't last for long. And I think it's going to be, if it comes, and I think it might well come, John, once it comes, that's going to be quite a difficult moment for people in the independence movement, because they're going to have to almost surrender this precious thing that they have built and it's felt like theirs. And they're going to have to accept that all of Scotland gets to choose what the new Scotland's going to be like. And there may be decisions and compromises in that process that people don't like. It may be things that they really don't like.
Well, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I mean, I you may not know this, but I do a column in the Sunday National, and I think the week before I was talking about what happened in the United States when the independence movement won. I mean, there was no sweetness and light. I mean, the main players would take to the public prints and denounce each other.
Yeah,
this is after they'd won independence. They defeated the biggest and the biggest navy and the greatest army in the world, aided much by the French, of course. But having got to that status, that condition of independence, there was no real consensus about where the priorities lay. I mean, to the extent that Alexander Hamilton, who effectively created the treasury and the financial arrangements in the United States, was at enormous odds with Vice President Van Buren, to the extent that there was a duel and they went to the spit of land and they shot at each other. This was not supposed to be serious. Unhappily, Van Buren didn't get the message. He didn't get the memo. And the next day, the poor Alexander Hamilton was dead. But that's the nature of independence type activities. It's not a smooth process by any means, because you're absolutely right. You have to involve lots of people who may have been on a very different position beforehand, and that takes skill. It takes judgment, and not very few countries do it smoothly. In fact, I don't think anyone does it smoothly. But there's lessons in history there which are open to us. Here's a question from Darren. Guy says, I've just tuned in. It's a great show. In Indy Scotland, do you foresee many big changes about how the media works? Perhaps fewer changes than you might think. I remember during the referendum campaign, a lot of people, I got this a lot, people on Twitter and elsewhere saying, just you wait till independence, you'll be out of a job, and there won't be any of this British papers, in Scotland. There'll all be Scottish papers for Scottish people, Scottish owned papers. And I'm thinking, where do people get that idea? The newspapers would be the same, the owners would be the same, the staffs would be the same. We wouldn't suddenly be under the control of new nationalist commissars who kind of, who gave us a patriotism test. Things would carry on largely as normal. There'd just be an enormously exciting story to follow, and that there's. I know I'm not the only journalist who, regardless of your view of independence, sees the possibility of independence as the biggest story of our lifetimes. Sure.
Accept it. And and if and when that day comes, we'll be all over it. We'll be engaged with it, and we'll be intellectually engaged in trying to make it work. Because, and I think this is also something that the Yes movement, I don't think, fully appreciates, is that, come that day, if that day does come, then we're all Scots in a new country and at the start of a new adventure. We live here. Our kids are here. Our families' futures are here. We would want to make it work. We would want, with all our hearts, for it to be a huge success, and we would, work to make it work. This idea that all this kind of, you'd be heading back over the border to England. No, I live here. I'm Scottish, and it's like there's a kind of othering of the other side in the constitutional debate, which I think is very regrettable, and I don't. I that's one of the reasons I'm on this program, John. It's the idea that it's to kind of break down the kind of yes and no, us and them, nats and yuns, kind of barriers. Because I do honestly think there's more that connects us than divides us. And on politics, I mean, my own instincts are far more class-based than flag-based. One of the great nationalists of our generation, John Hume, said, you can't eat a flag. It's I'm motivated by other things other than national identity, but and my instincts are leading towards cooperation rather than division. I'm not a fan of borders or walls, and so that's what I bring to this. But if we get there, then I'll be applying those to making an independent Scotland work.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting to know. The interesting thing too for me is that if you look at, I think there's an Irish Times, isn't there? If I'm right.
What? Sorry?
An Irish Times.
Yes, there is. Yeah.
Yeah, which is part of the same stable.
It's not actually.
It's not. I do beg your pardon. Okay. Well, that comparison I was going to make, I will no longer make. but it's interesting when I look at Irish newspapers. Many of them have the same sort of feel as UK papers, but they're addressed to an Irish audience and Irish advertisers. So necessarily they reflect that. That's the way it seems to me newspapers succeed or fail. You either reflect the society of which you're part, in that case you're a success, or you don't. In that case, you've got challenges, if we put it that way. But yeah, I think that's a fair point. And also, when I look at press overseas, Portugal, Spain, etc., it tends to be based less specifically on national issues, a bit more about left and right, which is the traditional model for most newspapers. Is they perhaps conform more to that than they do. But when you've got a major constitutional change, of course, that tends to sort of supersede pretty much everything else until you get to that point where the change either is finally made one way or the other. In that case, it goes back to the conventional, perhaps.
Well, on that point, John, one of the things often said, one of the great frustrations, and I understand this, within the independence movement, especially during the referendum, was that there were fewer newspapers supporting, the nationalist movement than there was supporting the UK side. And but I think that a lot of people, the 2014 referendum enthused enormous amounts of people, which was tremendous to see. It was heartening to see, and it was. But a lot of people came to politics very cold, and they had no interest in politics before. And you get members of the. I remember speaking to people, and a lot of them joined the SNP. I remember speaking to someone who shall remain nameless within the SNP, but it's within the structure, high up in the structure of the SNP, shall we say, who was saying you had to explain to people what politics was. You had to explain to them. You had to, on the first SNP conference after the referendum, you had to explain to people what a conference was and what a motion was and what a policy was and what a manifesto was. People just didn't have a lot of the information on it. And I think as a result of that, a lot of people who came to the independent, to politics in 2014 couldn't understand why it wasn't just a tabula rasa, where everyone just started from position A, then chose their sides. Yeah. And the newspapers did the same. I don't know how they thought this was going to happen, but they would half the newspapers would be UK supporting, half would be independent supporting, and and I think there's still a kind of a failure to appreciate that people and institutions bring their institutional memory and their history and their instincts to a question like Scottish independence. And, and an organisation like the Herald, one of the world's oldest newspapers, older even than the Times, and the Scotsman's going since 1812. The Scotsman is I was deputy editor of the Scotsman at one stage, and I ran the sister paper Scotland on Sunday as well during the referendum. And, these are organisations that were campaigning for Scottish home rule, Scottish self-determination, a Scottish parliament. Yeah. Half a century, a century and a half before the SNP was invented. Yeah. They are imbued in a history of this. And, this is what they bring to this question. And so it's going to take quite a lot to deflect something like that.
Isn't the case also, Kenny, that that's certainly the case. I mean, institutions, particularly business institutions, and newspapers are businesses, first and foremost. They need to shift copies, as you said earlier. They need to satisfy advertisers. Otherwise, frankly, you're back to student newspapers. You're not fussed who buys it. You just want to get your point of view across. Well, that's not going to be sustainable, certainly in today's world. But nonetheless, you've got a situation here where it seems to me that it's confusing for many people when they look at newspapers, because if you don't mind me saying so, I think newspapers sometimes do a very poor job at explaining what they're about. Mm-hmm. They leave it to the reader to figure it out. I mean, for example, you could argue, and some have, that if you look at the Conservative Party, which is now called the Conservative and Unionist Party, at one time, it did beat the Home Rule drum very forcibly, mm-hmm. and you could argue that drumbeat was collected by newspapers like the Scotsman and perhaps the Herald, and it reflected that mm-hmm. pressure for Home Rule, as it was called then, and maybe it's still called in some quarters. But it was a genuine way of saying, we like to be Scots at home, but Brits in London. And we can straddle that. It's possible to straddle that. At that time, I think that was a fairly general view. And I don't think a lot of people fully appreciate that the Conservative Party was a place where people talked about Home Rule. Mm-hmm. And the Scotsman, I guess, reflected that, and others. Now it's a very different creature. Yeah. And one of the thoughts that occurs to me, and I'll probably be talking about this on Sunday, is how long can this entity stay together where you have a right-wing party which uniquely is not nationalist, looking across Europe and elsewhere. I mean, most independent movements have a right-wing element to them. Scotland uniquely has none. Now, when I spoke to Andy McIver, he reckoned that's because the SNP did such a fantastic job in subsuming right and left into itself. I'm not sure I was wholly convinced of that argument, but it is an argument.
That is definitely the case. And you look around Europe, there is usually or if you look at countries with nationalist movements, almost all of them have, I'm thinking about Quebec, thinking about Catalonia, thinking about the Basque Country, there's at least two nationalist parties.
Yeah.
There's one that's of the left, traditionally, almost a revolutionary party, and there's one which is a kind of a right-wing, usually kind of blood and soil nationalism.
We don't like foreigners. Yeah,
kind of, and to think, and I think Andy McKeever is entirely right. I think both of those elements exist within the SNP, and one of the things I think we are greatly served by, and have been by, the dominant SNP leadership of the past half a century. And it's been, in the most part, on the liberal, centrist, centre-left bit of the political spectrum. Now, and I think nationalism in Scotland has been, I hesitated to use the word blessed, but we've been lucky in our leaders in the Scottish nationalist movement, because it could very easily have gone the other way, a charismatic figure. And, who knows what it'll be in the future, John. A charismatic figure who captures the national imagination, especially in a time of national crisis, and runs with that. And I think Andy McKeever's right. There is, to think that the Scottish nationalist movement, unique among all nationalist movements in the world, does not have a blood and soil populist, kind of element in it, would be, it would be a miracle if that was the case. It's not the case.
I think from another point of view, Kenny, which is that why hasn't somebody, as they have in every other country, said, I'm a conservative, but I want to be a nationalist, and I don't want to be part of any wishy-washy SNP type grouping. I'll do what every other right-wing nationalist does. I'll form my own party.
Yeah. Instead
of that, we've got, if you are such a person, you're stuck with the Conservative and Unionist Party. You're never going to, right now, have any hope of changing the SNP. So you would think, logically, that the Conservative and Unionists would cleave, and then there would be a representation of people like that, which exists everywhere else, but you'd have to agree it exists here, but there is absolutely no sign of it. And people have to sign up to two things. You have to be a Conservative and a Unionist. And that's maybe increasingly unrealistic.
I suspect, John, I think you're entirely right, and the possibility does exist on the right of within conservative politics. I would suggest, though, that we may be looking in the wrong place, and I may not be surprised to anybody watching this, but there is something of a civil war going on within the SNP at the moment, and there are elements, there are characteristics in the two groupings that are forming within. And I have no hesitation calling it a civil war, because that's what it is, because there's a division on personalities as to whether people are aligned more to Nicola Sturgeon or to Alex Salmond. There's a division on strategy for independence as to whether or not people think Nicola is dragging her feet. And there's a division on what can only be described as culture war issues on I think the one that's convulsing the party at the moment is over transgender, but it goes more broadly than that. I think I'm just waiting for COVID lockdown to become an issue in that division. There's already some murmurings within parliamentary SNP folk about the who are unhappy at the line being taken by the First Minister on lockdown. And I think it's only a matter of time before that kind of manifests itself in a more vocal unhappiness. So the reason I don't hesitate in talking about a civil war is that the people who are against the First Minister or not supporting them are the people who don't like her individually over the issues like the rose from the Salmond trial, for example. Those people are the ones who think she's dragging her feet on independence. They're also the ones who believe she is too woke too engaged and on a side of the gender war, the culture war. Perhaps a bit of a Freudian slip there. Gender war and culture war do overlap. Do you remember Hillary Clinton talked about the deplorables in American politics? There's a similar critique within a section of the SNP. There's a section of deplorables. Some within Scottish nationalism, if you listen to some people in the SNP. So there, I say that just to describe what I'm told about divisions within the party. So there is, I would suggest, John, that the at least the seeds of kind of nationalist movement, right nationalist movement within the SNP, and at some stage it may manifest itself in some form.
Yeah, it would be interesting because generally speaking, I think your analysis earlier is spot on. Once you move to our 60%, you get a repositioning. Newspapers reposition, advertisers reposition, the business community repositions. Everyone sort of moves a little bit. They sort of they say, "Well, I'm not," because what you can't afford is to be caught on the wrong side. When history changes, you don't want to be on the wrong side. You really don't, because then you're completely outflanked by somebody who might not be of the same quality because they happen to move faster. And particularly in business, you have to be first. You can't afford to be me too when it comes to these things. And I think there'll be some interesting things there. If you were to assess the mood in the Conservative Party in Scotland just now, how would you describe it?
In one word, appalled. The people that I speak to within Scottish Tory Party are depressed, angry, frustrated, but they're appalled at what they see as the attitudes in London within what is meant to be their party, and its attitudes to Scotland, and its apparent inability to grasp that the union is in danger. Now, I'm not a unionist with a capital U. I try, my background is a kind of from a working class Catholic family rebels against the description, but there's a very sincere unionism in Scotland among many Conservatives in particular that is not shared by the Conservatives down south. And that's a matter of great concern and some sadness for Tories in Scotland. And frankly, I was speaking to one Tory parliamentarian, and I was saying, "Well, what's going to happen? What's the great plan? What's the union unit going to come up with? What's that really clever guy, Michael Gove, with the brain size of a planet? What's he going to be doing? What's the plan?" And he said, "Then hold your breath. It's if there is one, they're keeping it very, very quiet. So quiet that they're not even telling some of their Scottish colleagues about it, because they're every instinct of the Boris Johnsons of this world is to kind of roll their eyes at the very idea of devolution, and we saw that this week, and it was a rare glimpse of what he actually thinks. The kind of things that before were only said in private were said in a semi-public forum, and that I don't think he is intellectually, emotionally, politically, ideologically equipped to come up with what's necessary to save, to save.
Good point. Do you think Michael Gove is?
I think he probably is. I mean, I used to be Michael Gove's editor. He wrote a column for me for Scotland on Sunday when he was an opposition MP. And first of all, I have to say he's one of the best journalists I've ever met. He would phone up on a Saturday morning with an idea. I would agree with the idea, and about 40 minutes later, the 1,000 words was chuntering through the fax machine. It almost took longer to write it, to read it, than he took to write it. He has a considerable mind. I do worry, as I worry about all Scots who live for a period of time in London, whether they lose that kind of granular, textural understanding of opinion in Scotland, because it moves fast. Look where we are now, just compared to 6 months ago. Who knows where we will be in 6 months' time? Who knows what will happen with all kinds of things can happen. Not least within the SNP.
We've had a question come in just very quickly because we're running out of time.
Yeah, sure.
I did say this hour goes fast, and heavens, it goes fast. It always. D. Rose is asking, I wonder if Kerry could ever see Sir Keir Starmer winning back seats in Scotland with a promise of full devolution, federal max, everything besides defence and foreign policy.
I'm slightly biased, John, because that's been my position for 25 years. I've always tried to, in my political journalism, I've always occupied that space in the constitutional question that was further than the Labour Party was willing to go, but not as far as the SNP would like. And that's always been where I've been. Yeah. And for me, the most interesting place within Scottish political debate, not least because I think that potentially that's where a majority of people lie. And if you have a credible, call it what you like, and it's called everything. And sometimes it's conveniently vague what people mean by Devo Max or Indy Light or federalism. I
don't want to rush you, but we're coming to.
All right, okay, yeah, no. So to sum up on that, I think the potential is there. Just now, I don't really see the meat on the bones. Yeah. That would suggest that he has something off the peg that can immediately appeal to people and make a difference in that time.
I mean, in fairness, Andy McIver said much the same thing, slightly different wording, because he comes at it from a slightly different perspective, I suppose. But I mean, he's a great proponent of federalism. Yeah. To some degree, based on his experience in Quebec and Canada. But the point I put to him was a fairly basic one, which is, in order to do that, you'd have to have some sort of written constitution, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to define what a nation is and what the parts of a nation are, and you have to decide who's sovereign and who's not. I mean, you can't do these things in a minute. You just can't, because any constitution that doesn't have public endorsement it's not a constitution. And how you would achieve that in the UK right now is beyond my ken. So that was the point I put to him. It may be a good idea in principle, but the practical problems in getting to doing it would be absolutely immense, because you have to convince everyone in England that a written constitution was a good idea and a federal system would be a good idea. And I think that would be an enormous sell, frankly.
Which is why I think probably, John, the more short-term, maybe the more achievable answer is that delightful phrase, asymmetric federalism, that you just give the extra powers to Scotland and you give extra, you cement the Scottish Parliament into the British Constitution much more securely. You give powers in Scotland to far more powers over welfare, taxation, immigration, and what you do is you try and you just do federalism in Scotland without bothering with the rest of the country, and let England find its own way to best reflect the wishes of the English people. And that's probably my position at the moment.
I understand that. As a constitutionalist, I would say the best of luck, because that's just about the most complicated thing to do in politics. Yeah. Asymmetric devolution or asymmetric federalism. Boy, that is a challenge, I have to say.
It's not so far.
It's been great tonight. You've been a great guest. We're almost out of time. I need to say thank you very much, because it's been excellent. I'm going to go into a few hatches, matches and dispatches just now, if you'll forgive me. A big thanks to everyone out there for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion. Keep your questions coming because they're always helpful. And again, we have another formidable guest next week. Suzanne McLaughlin is joining us, and she's also a journalist, this time from the National. And she has a long tradition of being a major player in the yes movement. So get your questions in for Suzanne, please. And look out for my Constitution column on Sunday in the Sunday National. I'll be taking a look at some of the comments made in the recent past over the last few days by Boris Johnson and many others about devolution, etc. And you'll find that in the 7 days supplement, by the way. Oh, and very importantly, support IndyLive, please, and IndyLive Radio, because these guys do a great job on a shoestring budget. Let me tell you, what you see may look somewhat glossy from time to time, but it takes a lot of hard work behind the scenes to make it appear so. Also, I need to tell you about this. A former guest on the show, the TNT show, was Alan Bissett, the playwright. You may recall Alan being on the show. He's holding a virtual house party on November 20th, and you're all invited. All you have to do is go to the What's On guide on IndyLive, and you'll find all the details. Oh, and by the way, can I really, really underline and recommend using the What's On guide? You'll find it on www.whatsonguide.scot. In addition to all of the programs on IndyLive, like this one and many others, you'll find there's a button you can press for IndyLive Radio. So while you're scanning the programs that are available, you can actually listen to the radio at the same time. Hey, how's that for 21st century technology? Okay, thanks again for joining us. Thank you, a big thank you to Kenny. And join us next Wednesday, please. And remember, it's been a great day for British democracy. Good night, all.
Never miss a live stream. The What's On guide to live stream events and shows now has its own website. You can find the guide at whatsonguide.scot, independencelive.net, or on multiple Facebook pages. Do you create your own live stream events and shows? Get them registered on the guide. See whatsonguide.scot for full details.
This is a new voice for a new Scotland.
We know you're busy people, so most of our shows are also on demand on our Scottish Independence podcast channel, available wherever you get your podcasts. You'll see what a great variety of shows we have. There's something for everyone. Our newest on-demand platform is IndyLive Radio's YouTube channel. We have set up playlists for our most popular shows and current topics, currency, list parties. New content is added almost daily, so subscribe and you won't miss anything. Join us. Thanks for listening.
IndyLive Radio.
It's not acceptable to say we just keep on trying and we have another mandate and we have another mandate and we keep on trying. You've got to make a political judgment statement that it's not going to work and say, well, in that case, we have either got to admit that we're not going to go for independence. And this is where I think the government has not been honest with people. That is, I'm not saying it will happen. I'm just saying that it is at least a possibility. If we hone in totally on Section 30, we could not get a referendum at all under Section 30. And therefore, that to me means that you've got to find another way.
But I don't think anybody who's gone over to yes now is really for moving, because I think they can see clear as day what things look like. And I always felt that during the independence referendum, that it would take a no vote in order for a lot of Scots to realise the consequences of voting no. They would have to see what happens when they vote no in order to realise what a mistake it was.
And to me, that's the clear blue water between staying in the UK and going for independence. It's clear, regardless of what Boris Johnson said the other day, that they will want to go back to business as usual, where the ultra-rich are the ones who gain from everything. Mm-hmm. We don't want to be part of that. We want the chance to actually build a fairer country.
It's the Brexit stuff for me, the nepotism stuff for me, breaking international law stuff for me, the ERG hijacking UK democracy stuff for me, education is a luxury stuff for me, £9,000 tuition a year stuff for me, it's the NHS on the table for a US trade deal stuff for me, demonising the working classes stuff for me, refusing starving children free school meals stuff for me, it's Boris calling Muslim women letterboxes stuff for me, his pickaninnies comments stuff for me, his bum boys comments stuff for me, his Scotland is a verminous race comments stuff for me, the UK internal market bill ripping up the devolution settlement stuff for me, devolved legislators being ignored during Brexit stuff for me, a lack of UK leadership during COVID stuff for me, nuclear weapons being in Scotland stuff for me, a decade of Tory governments Scotland didn't elect stuff for me, it's a weak left opposition in England stuff for me, attempting to frame independence as anti-English bigotry stuff for me, it's trying to ban anti-capitalist references in schools stuff for me, it's England-centric lefties painting SNP as a protest vote even though Scottish Labour is spineless stuff for me, it's the UK for me.
Film, you can watch this again, you can be part of it. It's Independence Live. Yeah. A few people asked about YouTube. It'll be YouTube/Independence Live. That's where you'll find the footage.
Here we are, it's the Yackin Bridge where we started the first 500 miles. In front of that beast there. This is where it all started. We're now in day 4 and we're heading towards Port 3. We'll see he's on the road. Sign the covenant. Long walk to freedom. Talk to you later.
Hi there, I'm Cliff.
And I'm Russ.
We're from the Veterans for Scottish Independence 2.0 group. And we're just invading your privacy today to let you know that we will be very shortly pushing our programme out on live stream to do with the veterans, their needs, as it will be
during an independent campaign, the next independence campaign, and indeed in an independent Scotland.
So get yourself in gear, come and join us, pull up a sandbag.
Yes.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Wherever you stand, get the fresh view of what's happening in Scotland with iScot. Celebrate everything about our country with intelligent, in-depth insight from lifestyle, culture to puzzles, and all the opinions you'll need. Whether it's digital or by post, subscribe now to iScot.
Never miss a live stream. The What's On guide to live stream events and shows now has its own website. You can find the guide at whatsonguide.scot, independencelive.net, or on multiple Facebook pages. Do you create your own live stream events and shows? Get them registered on the guide. See whatsonguide.scot for full details.
It's a song I wrote about 5 minutes ago called Carpe Diem, Hope Over Fear. Are you threatened by words from an empire of money and gold? Will you trade in your country's potential for the lies you've been sold? Are you scared that the walls are too high to be breached by the bold? Will you stand and be counted, or shut up and do what you're told? Hope over fear, don't be afraid. Tell Westminster Tories that Scotland's no longer your slave. Carpe diem, will you seize the day? Rip the chains from the unicorn, Scotland's no longer your slave. Let the TV man call you a nationalist for rejecting the lies. Are the wolves of the few off the bob, cause they wear shirts and ties? When they tell you that Scotland's no great, are you really surprised? Will you stand and be counted for something that money can't buy? Hope over fear, don't be afraid. Tell Westminster Tories that Scotland's no longer your slave. Carpe diem, will you seize the day? Rip the chains from the unicorn, Scotland's no longer your slave. Happy that nuclear weapons are dumped on the Clyde, fighting wars for the wealth of the few. How many have died? You can bury my bones, but the truth of it can't be denied. Will you stand and be counted, 'cause I'll be there stood by your side. Hope over fear, don't be afraid. The Westminster Tories of Scotland's no longer your slave. Carpe diem, will you seize the day? Rip the chains from the unicorn, Scotland's no longer your slave. Will the media tell you that England don't want you to go? And the taxpayer-funded MPs tell you just tell them no. No! But in Manchester, Nottingham, Sheffield, they already know that we're fighting for them, and it's only the start of the show. Ha ha! Hope over fear, don't be afraid. Tell Westminster Tories that Scotland's no longer your slave. Carpe diem, my friend, will you seize the day? Ha. Rip the chains from the unicorn, Scotland's no longer your slave. Vote yes for a future. Hope over fear. Ha ha!